My father was in the middle of a toast, glass raised, voice cracking with emotion, when he looked right at me and said, "And soon we'll have another one on the way, right, sweetheart?" The room laughed. My brother-in-law beamed. My sister pressed her hand to her barely there bump and smiled like she'd already won something. I was holding my 9-month-old daughter in my arms. He had no idea she existed. Let me back up, because I know how that sounds. I know you're already asking how a father doesn't know his own grandchild was born. I ask myself that same question every single day for the better part of a year. The answer isn't simple, and it isn't flattering, not for my father, not for my family, and honestly, not for me either, because I let it go on too long. I kept thinking someone would say something. I kept waiting for the moment it would fix itself. It didn't. My name is not important. What matters is that I'm the older daughter, the one who moved to Denver for work 6 years ago while my younger sister Tara stayed close to home in Columbus. Tara is 3 years younger than me, naturally charming in the way that makes adults in your family say things like, "She just has a gift with people," which is a polite way of saying she knows exactly how to work a room. I used to think that was just her personality. I know better now. I met my husband James at a work conference in 2019. He's from outside of Chicago. Quiet, steady, the kind of man who fixes things without being asked. We got married in a small ceremony in the fall of 2021. Tara was my maid of honor. My parents flew in, there were 40 people in a rented farmhouse in the mountains, and I thought we were close, I thought we talked. I thought my family actually knew me. I found out I was pregnant 8 months after the wedding. I was terrified and thrilled in the same breath. James grabbed both my hands in the bathroom of our apartment and said, "We've got this." I called my mother first. She cried. The good kind. She said she couldn't wait to tell my father. I said, "Go ahead, tell him, I want him to know." That was in March of 2022. What I didn't know, what I had absolutely no way of knowing, was that Tara had called my mother 20 minutes before I did. She was also pregnant, 8 weeks along, and she had spent those 20 minutes setting the stage. I learned all of this much, much later. At the time, all I noticed was that my mother's reaction was warm, but somehow thin. She asked how far along I was. I said, 6 weeks. She said, "Wonderful," in a tone that sounded like she was half listening. I figured she was distracted. My father called me that evening and said congratulations, and we talked for maybe 4 minutes, and I told myself that was fine. That was just how he was on the phone. He'd always been more of an in-person. Tara announced her pregnancy on a Sunday dinner video call 2 weeks later. I watched my parents' faces on the screen. My mother gasped and put her hands over her mouth. My father's eyes went red at the corners almost immediately. They asked every question. How far along? How was she feeling? Had she told anyone yet? My mother said, "A grandbaby," like she was saying the word for the first time in her life. I was sitting right there, also pregnant, also their child. Neither of them mentioned me. I told myself I was being sensitive. I told myself the timing was just unfortunate, that of course Tara's news still felt fresh and exciting because she was announcing it publicly for the first time. I was already known. Old news, that's what I told myself. The first real warning sign, one I should have acted on immediately, came 6 weeks later when my mother called to talk about Tara's baby shower. She wanted it at their house. She was already thinking about the guest list, the decorations, whether to do a theme. I listened and said it sounded lovely. Then I mentioned that James and I had found out the gender, a girl, and my mother said, "Oh, how sweet," and then continued talking about the shower venue. I got off the phone and sat on the kitchen floor for a few minutes, not crying, just sitting with the feeling of something being off in a way I couldn't quite name yet. James noticed. He said, "You should call your dad directly, just you and him." I said I would. I kept not doing it because I didn't want to make it a thing. I didn't want to seem needy or dramatic. I had spent my whole life not being the dramatic one. That was the choice I will always regret. Because while I was quietly not making it a thing, Tara was making it very much her thing. I found out later, through my cousin Meg, who felt guilty enough to eventually tell me everything, that Tara had been curating the family's information about my pregnancy almost from the beginning. Little edits. Little redirections. When my parents mentioned talking to me about the baby, she'd say something like, "Oh, she's been really stressed. I don't think she wants a lot of attention right now." When I sent a photo of my growing belly to the family group chat, Tara texted my mother separately and said I'd asked her to let people know I was going through some anxiety and preferred not to have the pregnancy be a big topic. I never said that. I never said anything even close to that. She told my father that James and I were having some problems. Nothing specific, just enough to make him hesitant to call and ask questions. She mentioned it casually, the way you'd mention weather, and then steered the conversation elsewhere. My father, who has always avoided conflicts the way some people avoid dairy, filed it away and gave me space. He thought he was being respectful. She had the baby shower in April. I wasn't invited. I was told later it was just local people, but half the extended family was there. My mother sent me a photo of the decorated nursery. Soft yellow walls, white furniture, a name spelled out in wooden letters above the crib. I saved the photo and didn't respond for 2 days. Our daughter, Nadia, was born on June 14th. James was there. My best friend Camille drove up from Colorado Springs and waited in the lobby. We called my mother from the hospital room and she said congratulations. She was so happy. And then asked if we'd heard that Tara was having some contractions and might be going to the hospital soon too. I hung up and stared at the phone and didn't say anything because what was there to say? The birth announcement I sent, with a professional photo, Nadia's full name, her weight and length, the time she was born, went into the family group chat on a Thursday afternoon. My father reacted with a heart emoji. My mother wrote beautiful. My aunt from Cincinnati called and left a voicemail. Tara did not respond at all. My father did not call. I kept waiting. A week passed, then 2. James said call him. I picked up the phone 6 times in 3 weeks and put it back down each time because I did not know how to have that conversation. How do you tell your father that you feel invisible? How do you do that without it becoming an accusation, without it becoming a whole thing that someone will characterize as you being difficult? Tara had her baby in July, a boy, 8 pounds 4 ounces. My parents drove to Columbus the same weekend. The grandparent reveal photos ended up on my mother's Facebook. My father holding the baby, eyes wet, face completely open in a way I had not seen in a long time. The caption said, "Our first grandchild, Theodore James Holloway." Theodore, first grandchild. Nadia was 5 weeks old. I screenshot that photo and put my phone face down on the counter and didn't pick it up again for the rest of the day. That was the moment something shifted in me. I had been patient, I had been understanding, I had been giving everyone the benefit of the doubt for months. I was done. James and I started talking seriously about what was actually happening, not the vague soft version, the actual version. We made a list. My parents had not visited. My father had called once since the birth, briefly, to say he hoped we were settling in. No one had asked to FaceTime with Nadia. The birth announcement had generated fewer responses in our family than a photo of my cousin's new truck. Meanwhile, my mother was texting me almost daily about Theodore, his weight checks, his sleeping schedule, a video of him smiling at 6 weeks. And then Meg called me. Meg is Tara's age, but we've always been closer. She's the cousin who will tell you the thing no one else will say. She called on a Saturday morning in August, and she started with, "I've been trying to decide whether to tell you this for 2 months, and I've decided you need to know." She talked for almost 40 minutes. She told me about the redirections, the quiet comments to my parents, the way Tara had slowly positioned herself as the family spokesperson for my pregnancy in a way that let her shape the narrative completely. She told me about the baby shower guest list. My absence wasn't logistics. It was deliberate. She told me my father had once asked Tara how I was doing, and Tara had said, "You know how she gets. She needs space," and my father had nodded and let it go. She also told me something that made my chest go cold. My grandmother had died the previous year and left me her china set. 12 full-place settings, hand-painted, brought over from her parents' home before she was married. It was the only thing I asked for when she passed. Everyone in the family knew it was mine. Meg told me she'd seen the set displayed in Tara's dining room the last time she visited. When Meg asked about it, Tara said I'd told her she could have it because I didn't have space in the apartment. I have a house. We bought it in 2021. I have a dining room. I have never once said anything about that china set except that I wanted it. I told James that night. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Okay, what do you want to do?" I said I wanted my father to know the truth, all of it, from me. But I didn't want to do it in a screaming phone call. I didn't want to send a long text that Tara could spin as me having a breakdown. I needed to do it in a way that was undeniable, in person, in front of people who would remember what they saw. The opportunity came in October. My parents were hosting a full gathering. They do it every year, usually 30 or 40 people, extended family and neighbors. James and I had already been planning to come back to Ohio for a visit. I told my parents we'd be there. I didn't mention Nadia. Actually, that's not entirely true. I had told my mother months earlier that we'd love to bring Nadia to meet everyone. She'd said, "Of course, whenever you're ready." I took that as a standing invitation. She had not followed up to ask whether we were bringing her or not. No one had. So no one expected to see me walk through my parents' front door with a 4-month-old on my hip. The gathering was already in full swing when we arrived. Laughter from the backyard, the smell of my mother's chili coming through the screen door. I went in through the kitchen. James beside me, Nadia in my arms in her little rust-orange outfit that James had picked out specifically because it was the kind of color that photographs. Well, my mother saw us first. Her eyes went to the baby and her expression went through about 5 different things in about 2 seconds. Surprise, recognition, something that looked like guilt, and then a smile that was trying very hard to look like joy. She said my name and reached for Nadia, and I let her hold her, and I watched her face go soft in the way faces do with babies, and I felt something twist in my chest that wasn't quite anger. We walked out to the backyard. My father was in the middle of a conversation with my uncle and 2 neighbors when he looked up and saw me. He smiled and opened his arms for a hug, and then his eyes dropped to the baby in my arms and he stopped. He actually stopped mid-step. He said, "Is that?" And I said, "This is Nadia. She's 4 months old, your granddaughter." I kept my voice completely even. I was not going to cry. I had decided that. You were invited to her birth. You got the announcement. You've seen the photos. You just haven't met her yet. The backyard got very quiet. My father's face did something I had never seen it do before. It kind of collapsed. Not dramatically, not in a movie way, just this quiet, internal crumbling, like something behind his eyes finally understood what it was looking at. He reached out and took Nadia from my arms without saying anything, and he held her against his chest, and his shoulders went up around his ears the way they do when he's trying not to cry in public. He stayed like that for a long time. Tara was across the yard. I saw her register what was happening and start moving toward us, and I turned to her and said, "I need you to wait." My voice was still calm. I was surprised by how calm I was. She stopped. I told my father, right there, with the neighbors standing close enough to hear and too polite to leave, I told him about the phone calls I'd made that went unanswered. I told him about the birth announcement he'd reacted to with a single emoji while Tara's was shared across the family within minutes. I told him about the Facebook post that called Theodore the first grandchild when Nadia was already 5 weeks old. I told him I'd spent 4 months after my daughter's birth waiting for my own father to call and ask how we were doing. I did not say Tara's name. I didn't need to. My father looked at Tara. It was not a soft look. She started talking immediately, the way she always does when a story is about to get away from her. A flood of words designed to reframe before anyone has time to think. She said she'd always meant to mention the baby shower, that it was just local people, that she thought I didn't want to fuss. She said she hadn't realized how things had come across. She said she was sure there were some miscommunications. My uncle, who has known Tara since she was born and has never had any patience for her specific brand of performance, said very quietly, "Tara, stop talking." She stopped. My mother was crying by then, the genuine kind, not the emotional moment kind, the kind where you understand that something happened on your watch that you should have seen. She kept saying, I didn't know, and what she meant was not that she hadn't known about Nadia, she had, technically, but that she hadn't understood the full shape of what had been happening. She thought she'd been giving me space. She'd been given a story about me that made space feel like the loving choice. My father held Nadia through all of it. He didn't put her down. Later that evening, after most of the guests had filtered out, my father sat at the kitchen table with Nadia asleep on his chest and asked me to tell him everything from the beginning. Not defensively, not looking for a version that made him feel better. He asked because he wanted to understand what he had missed and why, and how he had let himself miss it. We talked for 3 hours. He cried twice, once when I described calling him from the hospital room and feeling like an afterthought, and once when I told him about the Facebook post. He didn't try to explain his way out of either one, he just sat with it. About the china set, I brought it up at the end. My father went very still. He asked Tara about it directly. That same night in the kitchen, while I sat at the table and James stood in the doorway, and my mother held Nadia. Tara said she'd misunderstood, that she thought it had been offered. My father asked her to return it. She said she'd need to find the right time to pack it up. He said he'd like it done before we left on Sunday. It was on our rental car's back seat by Saturday afternoon. The months after that gathering were not simple. Families don't fix overnight, and mine is not an exception. My father called me every week for the first month, short calls, 15 or 20 minutes, sometimes just to hear how Nadia was doing. He flew to Denver in December and spent 4 days with us, sleeping on the guest bed and getting up with the baby at 6 a.m. so James and I could sleep. He bought her an ornament for the Christmas tree with her name and birth date on it. He hung it himself. Tara and I have not spoken. I don't say that with satisfaction. I say it because it's true and because I'm not sure what there is to say yet. What she did wasn't a misunderstanding or a series of thoughtless moments. It was a pattern, consistent and deliberate, sustained over months. That's not something you fix with an apology in a kitchen. Maybe someday. Not today. My mother is somewhere in the middle. She calls, she visits on FaceTime. She has started to understand that giving me space was not actually her decision to make. We are working on it. It is slow. I think it will be okay eventually. What I know now, that I wish I'd known then, waiting for people to notice you are gone, is not the same as making sure they see you. I was so afraid of being too much, too needy, too loud, too dramatic, that I made myself easy to overlook. I handed Tara a silence to fill, and she filled it on her terms. Never again. Nadia is 14 months old now. She walks in that stumbling, arms-out way that makes everyone in a room hold their breath, and then laugh when she makes it. She has James's eyes, and my mother's nose, and a laugh that sounds like she finds the whole world genuinely funny. Her grandfather calls her every Sunday and talks to her even though she can't talk back yet, because he says he's making up for lost time, and he intends to use every minute of it. I think about the woman I was at that October gathering, walking into my parents' backyard with my daughter in my arms and my voice steady and my mind completely clear about what I needed to say. I had rehearsed it. I had been afraid of it. And then I walked in and I said it, and it turned out the hardest part wasn't the words. The hardest part was deciding I was worth saying them for. I used to think that staying quiet was a form of kindness, that not making something a whole thing was what reasonable people did. I watched my father hold Nadia at that October gathering, her rust orange outfit, her face pressed into his shoulder, and I thought about every moment I had talked myself out of picking up the phone, every time I told myself he'd call when he was ready, every time I decided that my need to be seen wasn't worth the discomfort of saying so out loud. The truth is, Tara didn't succeed because she was clever. She succeeded because I handed her a silence and walked away from it. That's the part that took me the longest to sit with. Not what she did, but what I allowed by doing nothing. Cause and effect doesn't care about your intentions. It only registers what actually happened. I stayed quiet for 9 months and the world filled that quiet with someone else's version of me. What I know now is that honesty without courage is just a private feeling that changes nothing. I had the truth on my side the entire time. I had the birth announcement. I had the timestamps. I had Nadia, real and breathing and completely ignored by the people who should have shown up first. The truth that stays inside your chest while you wait for the right moment isn't actually doing any work. It took me standing in my parents' backyard, my voice steady, my daughter in my arms, to understand that the most decent thing I could do for Nadia, for my father, even for my mother, was to say the true thing clearly and let everyone decide what to do with it. That's not drama, that's integrity. And I had let my fear of being called dramatic keep me from it for almost a year. There's something else I've thought about a lot since then. My father is not a bad man. He's a man who took the easier interpretation of every signal he was given because the easier interpretation required nothing of him. That's not cruelty. It's a failure of attention, the kind that happens when you stop asking questions because someone nearby keeps providing ready-made answers. Intelligence, real intelligence, means staying curious about the people you love. It means noticing when your information about someone is always coming through the same single source. My father had stopped being curious about me. He thought he knew how I was doing because Tara kept telling him. He never thought to check. And then there was the part about just not giving up. I almost didn't go to that gathering. I almost told James it wasn't worth it, that I'd just let the distance become permanent and build a life that didn't include people who couldn't see me. I understand why people make that choice, but I wanted my father, I wanted Nadia to have a grandfather, I wanted the real version of my family, not the managed version Tara had been staging for months. So I packed the rust orange outfit, I drove to Columbus and I walked through that screen door. That decision, that one stubborn refusal to disappear quietly, is what changed everything. Nadia won't remember any of it. She was 4 months old, she was just happy to be held. But I'll remember. And when she's old enough to understand, I'll tell her the hardest part wasn't the confrontation. The hardest part was deciding, beforehand, that I was worth fighting for. Once I decided that, the rest was just showing up.